Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Friday evening to you all. I hope you guys are doing well out there and having a fantastic start to your weekend. And I certainly appreciate you folks tuning in this evening as we continue to give you updates on Hurricane Lee. But I will tell you, this will be the last lengthy update on Hurricane Lee. And I just want to say thanks for everybody in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, just folks in Southeast Canada, just in general. Thank you all for choosing my channel to tune in for these updates. Just thank y'all for the amazing support. I picked up so many subscribers for that area. So many kind things have been said. You guys have made me smile day in and day out. So thank y'all for supporting me. And not just the folks in Canada, of course, folks in the Northeast too. You guys have always been extremely kind in the Northeast and New England. So thank y'all so much for the support with breaking down Lee. And we are finally coming to the end of talking about him. But the end means that ultimately the impacts begin. So that is the case. We'll talk about impacts, and then we'll break down what is going to be Nigel. And Nigel could become a major hurricane. So we'll talk about where Nigel could potentially go, and we'll break down that information and what we know. And then a lot of our focus will begin to kind of go towards Nigel. But we'll also talk about, here in the coming days, the potential for a severe weather pattern to set up across the U.S. So there's continues to be a lot to talk about. So with that being said, if you folks have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it. If you guys got anything that I can pray about or pray over, as always, please put it in the comments below so I can do that. All right, Hurricane Lee on your screen, still a hurricane. It doesn't look much like a hurricane anymore, as it's basically losing its tropical characteristics. A lot of dry air has been wrapped into a Lee, and I'll show you a water vapor loop here in a second that really indicates that. But just like we thought, most of the action is basically on the west and northern portion of the storm, northwestern portion of the storm. It looks like there's a lot going on in southern New England and Maine, but there really isn't. The rain shield is still offshore of southeast Mass and Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and Rhode Island. Hasn't really moved onshore as of right now. But you guys are certainly probably already starting to see gusty winds, things like that, and some water's probably already getting pushed up into some of these shorelines. But certainly let me know what you guys are seeing out here. Great way to look at this is water vapor loop. All right, this just looks like a big blob heading north, right? It doesn't even really have that hurricane look anymore. You see these darker colors here, the real just kind of, well, darker colors, and then you see the whiter colors here. Whiter colors indicate more moisture in the atmosphere. You still got a big plume of moisture associated with Hurricane Lee. But you see this dry air right here. I'll do a little check mark. This dry air from this trough that is weakened has gotten wrapped up into the circulation of Lee. And you can see it coming up all the way into here. So remember, over the last couple of days, we've been talking about a dry slot on Hurricane Lee's east side. And this certainly is materializing. And you kind of go back and look at the other thing we were staring at, which really indicates higher cloud tops or colder cloud tops or warmer cloud tops, and indicates there's just not a whole lot going on the east side of this storm. That doesn't mean that you guys aren't going to see impacts in Nova Scotia, because you certainly will. It's just as far as rainfall, I think you guys will be on the drier side. Not dry side, but drier side. Certainly strong winds will still occur. So the latest information from the National Hurricane Center, as you can tell, the wind field on Lee is large. I mean, this is in the orange or yellow color you see, or whatever color you want to call this. That is basically where you're seeing tropical storm force conditions, or you can see tropical storm force conditions. Hurricane force conditions still in the brown area, and that's even pretty large. So this is the latest path. It's really zoomed in now, and it really likes the idea of making landfall in the southwestern coastline of Nova Scotia into New Brunswick, and then eventually making maybe a secondary landfall in the northern portions of Newfoundland. So we'll certainly see exactly where it comes onshore as far as the actual low-level circulation. But, you know, with the impacts being well away from the actual center, I wouldn't even focus on that too much. Tropical storm warnings up still for areas of Mass and New Hampshire, all the way up the coastline of Maine. The hurricane watches have been dropped for Maine, but hurricane watches still up for the southern and southwestern and western coastlines of Nova Scotia and the southwest coastline of New Brunswick. So tropical storm watches up for like Prince Edward Island, and then a little bit further up the coastline of Nova Scotia, tucked into the Bay of Fundy. So an 80-mile-per-hour storm moving at a pretty fast clip now at 20 miles per hour. So it's moving on pretty quickly. Still technically not an extratropical system yet, but it's well on its way to becoming one, which basically means it's losing its tropical characteristics and becoming a cold core storm. So let's take a look at the HRRR model. Not a great model for, hurricanes, but we're in the short range model where we can see how this evolves. And it's doing pretty well on this western flank of Lee coming up. As if you look at the radar out of Boston, it really indicates that there's a solid rain shield offshore that's ticking westward. So it will affect you guys eventually. But we keep this moving here, and the rain begins to move into southeast Mass, takes over the Cape Cod, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard region, makes it all the way to Boston. But like I said in a couple other videos, there's going to be a tight rainfall gradient. In Boston, you might get a tenth of an inch to a quarter inch of rain. But you go over here to like central Mass and to Connecticut, you will struggle to get a drop of rain. At this point, rain is already moving into the Yarmouth area. What is it? I think you pronounce it Grand. Let's make sure we say it right. I don't want to offend anybody. It doesn't seem like y'all have been offended at all, but certainly don't want to. But I think it's Grand Manan Island. Grand Manan. I think that's how you pronounce it. You guys, I'm sure, will correct me. But, you guys start to see some solid rain that moves in the middle of the night tonight, or take it all the way till about 7 o'clock in the morning. This is potentially what it looks like as far as what's falling. Rain has made it all the way to the eastern Connecticut region. It's over Long Island. Well, I'm sorry. It's over Rhode Island, the eastern sections of Long Island. It might rain a little bit, but just some breezy conditions, kind of a cool, coldish rain out here. Takes over the southern regions of Maine, the down east areas of Maine, certainly being impacted by some heavier rain. And this continues, but as you notice, the west side of this, the east side of the storm isn't completely void of moisture. It's just a lot of it is getting slung to the north side and west side of the storm. You guys will certainly get some heavy rains in like the Yarmouth area and Medigan region, the Wedgeport area, Weymouth, Digby, just this entire, Highway 103 that kind of straddles the western and southwestern end of Nova Scotia. You guys will certainly get a wind-driven rain tomorrow morning, for sure. I think that'll be your worst impacts from Lee will likely be tomorrow morning into early tomorrow afternoon in western Nova Scotia. But, you start to get, we'll back it up here. You'll start to see rain in like St. John, for example. You'll start to see rain probably just after midnight tonight. All right, rainfall will take over overnight and will last all the way through tomorrow morning. This is around lunchtime tomorrow. Landfall still has technically not occurred. We get into tomorrow afternoon, and this is kind of slowing down, and this is the center of the storm right here. This is around 10 p.m. tomorrow. Grand Manan Island getting whatever's left over of the technical eye wall of Lee, and I think conditions could definitely just go downhill steadily in the Grand Manan Island area. And certainly you can get hurricane force conditions, hurricane wind force conditions, like winds pushing over 75 mile per hour out here, and wind gusts. I wouldn't think of sustained, but you stop it here, and this is tomorrow evening. You see this yellowish orange color right here in the down east areas of Maine. Winds are going to be howling. This is still moving in. All right, this is fully taking over most of this area of New Brunswick, and we continue to move this, and this basically all of this basically starts moving eastward, starts to really bring a lot of rainfall and gusty winds for Prince Edward Island to the overnight hours tomorrow into tomorrow morning, and then this moves off to the east as a weakening storm. So what about winds? Well, my folks here in southern New England, you could get a 45 mile per hour wind gust in Boston. Rhode Island could get a 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gust. The further southeast and east you work out on Cape Cod, the stronger the wind gust potential is, where you can get 60, 65, 70 mile per hour wind gusts is quite possible. Mount Washington, all right, in New Hampshire, is certainly going to get some strong winds. That's for folks who aren't familiar with Mount Washington, that's basically, that mountaintop is home to some of the craziest weather in the world. So I'll be interested to see what our peak wind gusts can happen here on Mount Washington, which is a mountain that sits pretty high in the Alps here in the Northeast. So I'll be interested to see what the peak wind gusts up there will be with a stout northern to northeastern flow from Lee out here on the ocean. But we move our way up the coastline here, And I mean, I really think if you're tucked in right up against the coast in the down east areas of Maine, you will get probably a 60, 70, 80 mile per hour wind gust at some point. But I mean, these are some stronger wind gusts pretty far inland. I mean, basically the entire southern down east areas of Maine, this entire area of Maine, even up into central Maine, you could get some sporadic 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts, maybe 55 to 60 closer you get to the coast. You combine that with 1 to 3 inches of rain with already saturated soils in the northeast, that's going to be some issues. Grand Manan Island, I would definitely argue that you're going to get a higher wind gust than 43 miles per hour. You're probably going to get some hurricane force wind conditions. Sustained? No, but certainly some strong wind gusts, I think, in this region. Of course, you guys measure wind differently in Canada, but as far as miles per hour, tropical storm force wind gusts are likely throughout the entire region of Nova Scotia and southwestern and the coastal regions of New Brunswick. And there it is. Grand Manan Island has a peak wind gust of around 70 miles per hour. Okay, you convert this to kilometers per hour. Okay, and there you go. So tropical storm force conditions are going to be a very common occurrence across Nova Scotia, especially western Nova Scotia, St. John. You're going to have some sporadic 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts, I think. And it's going to get pretty gusty in Prince Edward Island too, where you guys could get probably, 80 to 90 kilometer per hour wind gusts. So this is in wind gusts too, not sustained. But man, I wouldn't want to be a soul out in Bay of Fundy or the Gulf of Maine, where winds will certainly be over hurricane force conditions if you're out on the water, which nobody will be. I would hope nobody is. But that's the latest on winds, rainfall. Man, this has really shifted east. I mean, only going for a 10th to a 20th of an inch of rain in Boston, and maybe an inch or two of rain out on Cape Cod. So it's really shifted east. We go up to, which is good. It's good news because we don't need no more rain in this area. But you still get in Maine, and you start to get to the down east areas of Maine. I mean, that's 4 to 5 inches of rain in these areas. The further you work away from this area, though, the more the rain drops off. GFS, as far as inches, there's going to be a pretty solid stripe of heavy rain that goes right through New Brunswick. I think St. John will be included in this, so you guys will get 3 to 4 inches of rain. You convert this to millimeters for you folks, and this is how much rain you guys could expect throughout this region. So, just kind of take a look at this. It looks like Yarmouth, they're going for 80 to 90 millimeters of rain. So it looks like St. John, maybe 50, 60. I would aim towards more so 70 millimeters of rain. And then not going for a lot in Prince Edward Island. Looks like you guys get a dry slide of the storm, but you guys could certainly get more rain than that. So, guys, that's my last long update on Lee. We'll talk about him tomorrow, but that's my last long one. Thank you all for the support up in Canada. And we'll certainly keep you guys in our forecast if you guys get under a threat again for sure. So let's go on and talk about Tropical Depression 15. It looks exactly like a tropical depression. All right, just an unorganized area of showers and storms that we do expect to get more organized over the next few days. It does have an excellent upper wind pattern, which means that winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere are supportive for tropical development, which means we're not dealing with really any shear. So the environment out here certainly supports gradual development. So that's Tropical Depression 15. Low-level circulation is evident somewhere under all this convection, but just kind of sporadic areas of convection. So if you want to know the beginning stages of a hurricane, this will likely be Hurricane Nigel at some point. So if you're going to be with us for the entire long run of this, this is exactly what a sloppy tropical depression looks like. Latest cone from the National Hurricane Center, guys. For you folks who's been tuning in with these tropical updates, you guys should know what an M means by now. That stands for a major hurricane, Category 3 or higher. But it's saying that this should be Tropical Storm Nigel by tomorrow afternoon. But look at it gaining latitude. I mean, it gains latitude so fast that even Bermuda isn't even in this cone. But Bermuda really needs to watch out for this. I'm going to tell you straight up, guys, I'm not going to hype this up for no reason for clicks. I don't think this is a threat for the U.S. Do I think that Bermuda needs to watch? Oh, absolutely. Do I think maybe Newfoundland needs to watch up here? I do. But this if you want to talk about a storm that has all the makings of a fish storm, it's this. And I'm going to talk about why. Could this change? Absolutely. But I think that Nigel is going to really just be something cool to look at on satellite. Could change. Should form into a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm Nigel by tomorrow, and then should reach hurricane status by Sunday night. Then it should reach Category 2 status by Monday afternoon, so we could undergo some rapid intensification. And then by Tuesday afternoon, it's going for a major Category 3 hurricane at 115 miles per hour, well north of the track that Lee took. Okay, look at Margot out here. She's having a hard time. Margot's having a hard time letting go. Maybe she's just had one too many drinks. I'm not sure what's going on with her, but she's out here doing some loop-de-loops and just very, very confused individual out here for sure. I'm just having a little fun, guys. It's not all serious. But the latest GFS, and you can watch Margot. Margot will kind of just spin around. Basically, what's happened with Margot, she's trapped under a rigidified pressure, so she can't really go north. Or it can't really go north. I saw some comments that almost seem offended that I called Lee a him, but that's just what I do, guys. It's just, it helps my flow. I like to just assume it's a him, but anyways, guys, I'm a little out of it. I'm tired. Let's just keep this video rolling. But we keep this going. We're getting into Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. As you can tell, the millibars are beginning to drop, which indicates a strengthening storm, but this is moving due northwest and almost moves north-northwest. There's no substantial ridging on top of Nigel to really make it go just more so east to west. Okay, so this is strengthening into a hurricane at this point. Probably sometime Monday afternoon, certainly a hurricane. The latest GFS has this moving north, missing Bermuda, and then northeast very quickly, and then heading on out to sea and not bothering a soul. Very strong hurricane up here, though, in the North Atlantic. What does the European show? The European, remember, has that weak bias. All right. So it doesn't strengthen soon to be Nigel as fast. But same thing. It inches it a little bit closer to Bermuda, probably because this is a weaker storm. Makes that turn north sometime next week. And then by the time we get into this time next week, I mean, this thing's heading back out to sea. But there is one right behind it. We got to watch. All right. We're in some active times out there in the tropics. We really are. So I don't think we're done with Nigel after we're done with Nigel either. But we've talked about this a lot with Lee. The upper wind pattern, this is winds about 40,000 feet up in the air. In these blue areas, you see how we have these streamlines going like this? And you guys might remember me talking about this with Lee. Okay, so you got winds going like that, about way up in the atmosphere, 40,000 feet up in the air. This tropical system's spinning like this. Okay, that's how low pressure spins in the northern hemisphere. So what's going on? Remember, we call it an anticyclonic flow, which means this is a healthy storm. It's ventilating very well, which means that basically rising air is occurring in the storm because we have ongoing convection. As this air rises, when it gets on top of all this convection, it gets pushed back out by winds going in the opposite direction. This immediately allows for more air to rise, and then the upper levels of the atmosphere above all the showers and convection forming with soon-to-be Nigel gets pushed back out. So what does that allow? Well, that allows for constant rising air. And when you have the constant ability for a storm to have rising air, you have persistent convection that is able to develop and continue to develop and strengthen. So that is the case with the upper environment, upper wind flow for this tropical depression. Likely going to be Tropical Storm Nigel sometime this weekend. This continues. An excellent environment does occur. It could deal with some shear at some point. But, you know, once it gets involved into this jet out here, I mean, this thing's going to be blast off. It's gone. So, why does Nigel do what it does? Well, we'll show it. Here it comes, popping up on your screen. As you can immediately tell right off the dot, subtropical ridge, all right, is way up here. You got here in the orange, that is ridging. The blue is low pressure. The orange is high pressure. The flow goes around both of these features different, okay? So if we had this orange area that was way down here, all right, this would push soon-to-be Nigel dangerously close to the Bahamas or the Caribbean islands or the southeast. But you have it instead way up here. All right, there's nothing really pushing soon-to-be Nigel this way. Instead, Nigel's, one, able to strengthen, and two, we know that a stronger storm always wants to gain latitude, always wants to go north. Okay, there's some ugly arrows. But we keep this going, and there it is. It finds that weakness. That's an easy weakness. Ridge does try to build on this. This might prevent it temporarily. You see how that ridge nudges down on it and temporarily kind of stalls it from making that turn north? Okay, but eventually this ridge is, one, extremely weak, and then two, it just kind of shifts to the east, almost southeast, and then it just rides on top of that ridge and then heads out to the North Atlantic and just kind of bombs out there and doesn't bother anybody. So there is, basically in a nutshell, guys, there is no subtropical ridge out here to really keep this moving into the Caribbean or closer to the southeast like Lee did. So that's pretty much why it looks like it's going to be a fish storm. And you can tell, look at old Margot just spinning around out here. But here comes soon to be Nigel. Nigel does become a powerful hurricane probably. But almost every run has this turning north and then northeast and going out to sea. So that's all I got, guys. Thank y'all for tuning in. God bless all y'all, and I hope y'all have a great night.